This is my Kamtec 32 Coupe. Most of my Kamtec bodies fit almost perfectly onto a Tamiya M chassis built to its shortest wheelbase, like this Volvo Amazon or this lovely Ford Popular body. The range of 1930s style bodies offered by Kamtec to fit the M chassis is limited, yet they do produce a range of slightly smaller bodies as well. They have both a shorter wheelbase and a narrower track than the M chassis compatible bodies, and I've found that they fit very well on the narrow track Carisma GT-16 Beetle chassis. As you can see, it's a bit too narrow really for this 32 Coupe body. Since the 1990s, a race series has existed called Legends Racing. The cars are mechanically identical and all use one of several specified body shells which are designed to resemble those of the 1930s and 40s, but in 5/8 scale. For this reason, full-size Legends race cars are very small, and this is reflected in Kamtec's scaling of the model. I ordered a Legend body, originally intending to cut it down to make a truck cab for my WPL B24. But when it arrived I found it so beautiful that I couldn't bring myself to cut it. What could I do? My Carisma chassis already had a body, so there was only one thing I could do. I bought another Carisma. I hope that this beautiful body will fit pretty much perfectly on the Carisma chassis. Here's the body now that I've cut it out. I have made a couple of changes. At the back, I didn't like the shape of the rear window aperture, so I changed it and just made my own. And at the front, I've cut the body slightly lower than I think Kamtec intended, because I was hoping to cover this part here on the other Carisma chassis. I need to try the body on the Carisma chassis to make sure that that's okay and that I don't need to trim it higher, because if I do, then I'm going to have difficulty if I've already cut out this hole here. Before I can try it on though, I'm going to have to take off these engine bars. Right, with them removed, it does look as if I'll be able to get away with leaving this peak coming down so far, but I won't be able to be certain until I've drilled the body holes. Well, I've positively peppered the thing with holes, as you can see, trying to find the best compromise. Generally I've had to centre the rear wheel and decide to cut rather a lot off the front mudguards. At the moment it's down at the back, lower in fact than I need it. I should add, by the way, that I've left it 10mm over long. You're supposed to cut the body off here. I just wanted to see what it looked like with its arse sweeping the deck. Yeah, so at the front I'm going to have to do quite a lot of cutting and hope I can get it to fit as best I can. That means as low as I can get it, basically. I've just cut off everything I showed you and it still won't go down at the front. I'll move the camera to show you why. I'm using the frontmost set of holes, which moves the body as far back as possible, and in this position the wheel lines up beautifully with the wheel arch at the rear. However, the front won't go down because the bottom of the grille hits this little lump here, which is some sort of non-removable integral part. So I tried using the centre of my 3 sets of holes, and what a difference it makes down below. Suddenly the wheel's miles out of alignment at the rear, and the front now looks as though this would in fact clear this thing if I drill the holes. But that's no good, because the back's useless. I've gone too far with hacking this poor little body up to change my mind now, so the only option is more surgery. I'm not completely delighted with the way it looks. I hoped that it would be a tiny bit longer and I'd be able to get this grill to come down over this lump, and then I could have left it much longer and deeper. But it has occurred to me that I could stick another grill over the front if that one bugs me too much. I've been looking at this little body and I'm just not really completely happy with it. And that's because although I've got the rear wheel lined up neatly in its arch, the front's just miles out. I wish I'd ordered two bodies. Then I could have just made one body that was slightly longer and had exactly the right wheelbase. But the good news is, these bodies are really, really affordable. They're £6 each. So I've just ordered another two. And I'm going to wait till they arrive and then join them both together and do a decent job. What will happen to this body? That I don't yet know. But I've learned a lot from doing it. I've learned where the rear body post holes should go. And that will serve me in good stead when I come to build a long enough one. It has occurred to me that as I'm not going to use this body, it's pretty much surplus to requirements now. And what I would usually do with such a thing is probably paint it all rustified and have it in the background in a scene or something like that. But I recently found myself watching The King of Random, and he showed an interesting way of colouring objects by hydro dipping. In other words, spraying aerosol spray paint onto the surface of some water and then dipping the item you want to paint in the result. I'm going to have a go at that right now and see what I get using rusty colours. Well, it didn't come out anything like The King of Random's work, which looked wonderful. And this cost a fortune in paint and looks terrible. Still, I'm glad I tried it, because now I know not to bother doing it. Well, there's good news. The two new bodies have arrived from Kamtec. So my plan is to cut one just in front of the B pillar and cut the other some way behind it. And I'm hoping that extra 23-24 mil will bring point around here on this wheel arch in line with the centre of the wheel. And if I get that right, not only will I be able to bring the front down, but this grille will sit in front of this lip. I cut the two bodies in different positions and put the wrong halves together, so I ended up with one very, very short wheelbase car and one much longer. If I take out this pillar here, when I cut out the window, I should end up with a reasonably convincing looking car of the right length. I glued my two halves together and then made a discovery. Somehow I've managed to make the new body too long. If I lift this one away and offer up this one so that the rear wheel arches line up, the front doesn't line up. I had so much faith in my ability to measure and mark and do mental arithmetic quickly that I never actually checked before I glued the two halves together. So they're going to have to come apart again. So, I've drilled 4 holes and plonked the body in position. Let's have a closer look. At the rear, we get our full travel, and the same goes for the front. I got the front holes in the right position, but I can't really say the same for the rearmost ones. I've got some tidying up to do there. As for the join between the two body halves, after filling, it doesn't look too bad. I also think the car looks a lot better with the grille coming right down to here, unlike the grille on my first attempt, which I cut off much shorter to try and clear this protrusion here, which is of course the mount for the original bull bar. Now I'm happy with the way that the body fits onto the car. I know I'm not going to make any further changes to it, so I can go ahead and cut out the opening for the radiator grille. That's the shape I've gone for. It needs a little more straightening up, and then it'll be time to think about paint colours. Here are the two bodies. I think I'm probably going to paint this body black. First I need to raid the kitchen and grab some salt. I've given the body a coat of matte black paint over the salt. As soon as it's dry, I'll wash it off and we'll see what we ended up with. So there it is, quite heavily rusted. I haven't done this one as heavily rusted as I've done in the past, but then of course Legend racers do have fiberglass bodies, so you'd never see one of these rusted up in the real world anyway, which means that striving for realism is a bit of a fruitless task in this case. One of the reasons I'm building this little Legend racer is that I enjoy driving my Carisma 32 Coupe so much, and I wanted to have two so that my wife and I could enjoy driving them together. I painted this one black because I wanted it to contrast with the other one, which is a rusty shade of yellow. So when we're driving them around, I wanted to be able to distinguish easily between them. But overnight I've looked at this and I've decided that I don't want it to be black all over. So I've masked up the wings, fenders or mudguards and running boards, and the grille, which I'm going to leave black, and I'm going to give the whole thing a coat of rust, some salt, and then a coat of red paint. Here's the body covered in salt and red paint. I've just sprayed it. Unfortunately it fell off its stand while I was doing so, so I might have to redo the roof. The bonnet looks as if it might be a bit dodgy too. A lot of salt fell off here. But the joy of this is that if you don't like it, you just do it again. I've washed the salt off. As I thought, the bonnet doesn't look brilliant, but I really like most of it. Let me just get rid of that sheen of light there. So there's the back. Roof. That's not very good, is it? I might do some touching up there. And left side? Yeah, the left side's alright. And as I mentioned before, I left the grille in its black and rust combo. I've made up and fitted a little simple mesh grille, and now it's time to install this bulkhead that I'll put behind the grille to stop light getting through it and also to serve as a mounting point for the headlights. And there's the bulkhead glued to the inside. Looks a bit better from the outside now. It's time to make some headlamps, and for that I'm going to rely on my old favourite, these round tipped pens. You can actually use either end. Once I've cut the two ends off the pens with a Dremel, there are 4 reinforcing webs inside each end, and I'm just going to get rid of those so that I can get a reflector in there. Now that I've cleaned out those reinforcing webs, I'm ready to paint them, but I don't just want to paint these alone. While I'm at it, I may as well think about hubcaps. The first time I put a Kamtec hot rod body on one of these little Carismas, I used Kinder Egg tips to form the hubcaps. They have quite a long radius curve, in other words quite a gentle curve to them, so to get the edges to curve round enough to go past the wheel nut and touch the rims, they actually have to be this big, they can't be any smaller. I want this Carisma to look as different as possible, especially as they're both wearing the same wheels. So I've decided to do something else this time. These are caps from roll-on deodorant bottles, and they curve rather more sharply, so I think I can get a smaller hubcap to still curve past the wheel nut and come down and touch the rim all the way around the edge. I've marked them up, so I'll cut them off with the Dremel and then spray them at the same time as the headlights. I painted the headlamp shells in rust and then gave them a light spray over with the same cherry red I used for the body. As for the hubcaps, having given them the same coat of rusty paint that I gave the headlight bowls, I salted them quite heavily and then painted them silver. Let's wash the salt off and see what I got. Here are the hubcaps now I've washed off the salt. And while I was waiting for the paint to dry, I haven't been idle. I've brush painted the rims of the wheels with the same red colour that I used for the body. Each hubcap should sit in quite a small space, leaving a lot more of the rim exposed than the Kinder Egg ones do. I've put tinfoil reflectors into the headlamp shells, glazed them and installed them, using the bulkhead as ever as reinforcement for their long wire brackets. The hubcaps have come out quite well, and I like the way they look with the red wheels and the red body. Here are the other two. If I'm installing a driver into the body shell rather than into the car somehow, then in general I prefer to do the windows next. Once you've got the driver installed in the body shell, it makes it very, very hard to glue the windows in neatly. To make cutting out the plastic for the windows simpler, I've made some simple templates from cardboard. With the plastic cut out, it's just a matter of gluing the pieces in as neatly as I can. And there it is with the windows in place. It's starting to look like a car. I must say I like the proportions that we achieved by stretching this body. And now it's time to choose a driver for this car. The driver does need some pretty drastic surgery to fit in half. It's going to be pretty much from the shoulder, well, just below the shoulders upwards. So this chap's safe because he's already been cut in half in another incarnation and he's already driving the other Carisma. This guy, some kind of weird mafia dude. No, I don't really want to cut him in half. I've got other plans for him. As for this guy, well, I certainly don't fancy trying to persuade him to let me cut him in half. This weird superhero-y sort of guy isn't too bad a candidate, but what would he be doing in a 1930s car? Amanita from Sense8, Gwen from Torchwood, and Helen Cutter from Primeval are all safe because for some weird psychological reason I don't cut my female action figures up. I just can't bring myself to do it. So we're narrowing down the field a little. We've got this well-dressed gentleman and this dude. Well, they're both quite archaically dressed. Neither would look that out of place perhaps behind the wheel, but I think I'm going to go for the younger guy. He looks as though he's cut from a heroic mould. I hope he won't mind too much the minor sacrifice of having most of his body amputated so that he'll fit behind the wheel. So once our friend here's been through the surgery and is installed behind the wheel, what else will be left to do? It'll be time to think about door handles, back lights, whether or not to go with things like windscreen wipers and bumpers. We're getting within sight of the end, I think. The next thing I need to do is to work out at what height on his body to cut this guy in half so that he can fit into the car. In order to do that, the easiest thing is to consult this model. Next sitting at the right height, let's whip the body off and see how I achieved that. We can see that I cut this guy off just below the arms and that I used all the space I could here, so I'm sure I'll have to do the same on this other Carisma as well. Right mate, if you'd like to position yourself on the slab, thanks very much. And of course there's every chance that this man's lower half will go on to lead a meaningful existence in some way. But this is the bit we need. And there he is in the car. I've stuck him on the right this time for no particular reason. The first video I ever made featuring one of these Carisma GT-16s ended in an abrupt and unplanned fashion when sand got into the housing and destroyed the pinion and the spur gear. I don't think it would be altogether fair to blame Carisma for this. They've put the effort in and done everything they can to shield this little lot. It just happened. So one measure I did take with this, the first car, was to add a piece to the body, which I'll show you now. What I did was to add this piece here. It's surprisingly effective constraining all the stuff that's swirling around in here from the back wheels and guiding it back down and out. I've run this body quite a lot much more than I ran the car with the original Beetle body, and with this body, with this modification, it hasn't happened again. In order to save on my expensive model maker styrene, I'm just going to use this plastic food tray. I did find that I had to heat the stuff before I could get it to curve and take that shape. I'll let the glue dry and see how it looks. I'm sure I'll have to tailor it and tweak it. Once the glue had gone off on the grip deflector, I was able to use more heat to flex it here and here, so it ended up fitting really snugly and I could glue it into place and then just give it a spray of brown paint. With the front lights done, it's time to move on to the question of rear lights and also door handles. The Carisma body that came with the chassis could provide both. Carisma's beautifully crafted little rear lights are exquisitely shaped and also LED ready. I also like the door handles that Carisma have provided. But this is still a really nice little body, and at the moment it's intact. I don't think Carisma supply these bodies separately, and there might be somebody out there who really needs this. So it seems a shame to start ripping the lights and the door handles off it while it's still brand new. I like the elegant oval shape of the Beetle's rear light cluster, so I've copied it 6 times onto this sheet of thick 2mm styrene. With these cut out, I can glue them together into 2 sets of 3 and then start thinking about some sort of lens. So after quite a bit of sanding, I've made 2 of these. They try to follow the profile of the original more or less. Certainly they present the lens nearer to the vertical, which is what I wanted to achieve. And here are 2 tiny door handles, which I cut from 2mm styrene and then sanded to a rounded profile. I've finished my homemade Carisma knockoff door handles, and here they are glued to the car. They look a lot better than the usual piece of bent rusty wire that I shove in there. And over here on the bench are my backlight units, minus the lenses. Now I need to cut a couple of lenses from some sort of clear red plastic. I usually use red or orange stained very thin cellophane sweet wrappers, but this time I found something better. This rear light lens looks to me as if it's come from a truck or a trailer, and for once I didn't find it at the side of the road. Nope, it was bang in the middle of the road. I picked it up delightedly. As you can see, there are various textures, none of which are particularly helpful, except this one. I like this one. It's just a series of straight ribs. So I've cut a little piece with a Dremel, which I'll snap out and use to make my oval shaped lenses. And here are the lenses now that I've cut them out. I'm not going to try and position them in place on top of those on this tiny set, because I'll just knock everything flying. I'll glue them on and get back to you. At last! There they are. Now I've got to think about where to put them on the car. The Beetle has them out on the mudguard, or wing, but I don't know, do I want to put one here? Or would they be better off there, on the body? I looked at several 1930s cars on Google Images, and the overwhelming consensus is that the rear lights do go on the fender, mudguard or wing, depending on which part of the world you're from, rather than on the body, so that's where I'm going to be putting mine. License plates. I'm not going to fit them to this car because this is a basher. It's going to go over jumps and tumbling end over end and cartwheeling along, and I've learned from experience that you have to limit how much scale detail you let yourself put on a basher. It's just not worth the time and the trouble. There is one job left to do, and that's to clip the body on, which I've done, and trim off the overlong body posts. Oh, it does look much better with the body clips trimmed off. I'm really pleased with the way this has come out. I hope it's not just me. I hope you like it as well. Let's take it for a drive.